The autumn of 1887 brought with it a chill that seemed to seep through even the grandest of English manor houses, and Blackwood Hall was no exception. Lord Edmund Blackwood, 29th Baron of Ashworth, stood at the tall windows of his study, watching the grey Yorkshire countryside stretch endlessly before him. At 29, he possessed everything a gentleman of his station could desire: vast estates, considerable wealth, and a reputation that commanded respect throughout the county. Yet something indefinable gnawed at him, a restlessness that neither his collections of rare books nor his prized horses could satisfy. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew his attention. Through the leaded glass, he observed Mrs. Pemberton, his housekeeper, greeting two young women who had just alighted from the servants' conveyance. Even from his elevated position, Edmund could see there was something remarkable about these newcomers. They moved with identical grace, their blonde hair catching what little autumn sunlight filtered through the clouds, and they appeared to be twins of extraordinary beauty. Edmund's fingers drummed against the window-sill as he watched Mrs. Pemberton lead the young women toward the servants' entrance. The Baron had built his reputation on his ability to remain detached, to view the world and its inhabitants with the cool calculation that befitted his station. Yet something about these twin figures stirred an unwelcome curiosity within him. "My lord," came the voice of Hartwell, his butler, from behind him. The elderly man had served the Blackwood family for over 3 decades and possessed an uncanny ability to appear without sound. "The new maids have arrived, as you requested." Edmund turned from the window, his expression carefully composed. "Yes, I observed their arrival. Have Mrs. Pemberton see to their quarters and duties. I trust she will ensure they understand the standards expected at Blackwood Hall." "Of course, my lord. Mrs. Pemberton has already begun their orientation. The young ladies are named Rose and Lily Fairfax, twins from the village of Whitmore. They come with excellent references from Lord Ashford's estate." The names suited them, Edmund mused. Rose and Lily. As delicate and beautiful as their floral namesakes, yet there had been something in their bearing that suggested they possessed more substance than mere ornamentation. He dismissed such thoughts as fanciful and returned his attention to the correspondence spread across his mahogany desk. Yet throughout the remainder of that afternoon, Edmund found his concentration wandering. The quarterly reports from his steward seemed duller than usual, the letters from his solicitor in London more tedious than ever. When the dinner hour arrived, he took his customary place at the head of the long dining table in the great hall, where the portraits of his ancestors gazed down upon him with painted eyes that seemed to hold judgment. It was then that he first encountered Rose and Lily in their capacity as house servants. They entered the dining-room with the quiet efficiency that marked well-trained domestics, carrying the silver service with steady hands. Edmund had dined alone countless times, served by various members of his household staff, yet something about this evening felt different. Rose, he determined, was the one who approached his left side to pour the wine. Her movements were fluid and practiced, yet when she leaned forward to fill his glass, he caught the faintest hint of lavender in her hair. Her features were delicately sculpted, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of spring violets. When she met his gaze briefly, there was no coquettishness in her expression, merely the respectful attention of a servant to her employer. Lily served from his right, presenting the evening's courses with equal grace. Though identical to her sister in most respects, Edmund noted subtle differences. Where Rose's demeanor held a quiet reserve, Lily possessed an almost imperceptible warmth that seemed to emanate from her very being. Her smile, though properly modest, held a hint of genuine pleasure, as though she took satisfaction in performing her duties well. Neither twin spoke beyond the necessary, "My lord," or "Will there be anything else, sir?" Yet Edmund found himself prolonging the meal simply to observe them. He requested additional courses he did not particularly want, asked for wine to be poured when his glass was barely touched, all the while maintaining the imperious facade that was expected of his station. When the meal finally concluded, Edmund retired to his study, but concentration eluded him entirely. The leather-bound volumes that usually provided him with hours of intellectual stimulation now seemed to mock him with their silence. The brandy he poured held no appeal, growing warm and forgotten in its crystal tumbler as his mind wandered to thoughts of violet eyes and golden hair. Over the following days, Edmund found himself creating excuses to encounter the twins in their duties. He would request tea to be brought to various rooms at unusual hours, summon them to receive instructions that could easily have been conveyed through Mrs. Pemberton, and take walks through corridors he rarely frequented, timing his movements to coincide with their cleaning schedules. Rose, he discovered, possessed a quiet intelligence that manifested in her careful attention to detail. When arranging flowers in the morning-room, she displayed an artistic sensibility that transformed a simple task into something approaching art. Her reserved nature intrigued him. She answered his questions with proper brevity, yet her responses revealed glimpses of thoughtfulness that suggested depths beneath her servile exterior. Lily, in contrast, brought warmth to every room she entered. Her laughter, though quickly suppressed in his presence, rang like silver bells when she thought herself unobserved. She hummed softly while she worked, old ballads that spoke of love and longing, and her very presence seemed to brighten the often somber atmosphere of Blackwood Hall. The realization that he was developing feelings for both women struck Edmund with the force of a physical blow. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to maintain appropriate boundaries between himself and those beneath his station. Yet as October surrendered to November, he found himself increasingly consumed by thoughts of the Fairfax twins. The situation came to a head on a particularly cold evening when a fierce storm lashed the Yorkshire moors. Edmund sat in his study, attempting to focus on estate business, when a soft knock interrupted his concentration. "Enter," he commanded, expecting Hartwell or perhaps Mrs. Pemberton with some household matter requiring his attention. Instead, Rose stepped into the room, carrying a silver tray laden with tea service. "Mrs. Pemberton thought you might appreciate some refreshment, my lord, given the severity of the weather." Edmund gestured toward the small table beside his chair. "Set it there." He watched as she moved with her characteristic grace, noting how the firelight caught the golden strands of her hair. "The storm shows no signs of abating." "No, my lord. Cook fears we may lose some of the garden walls if the wind continues at this strength." It was more conversation than Rose typically offered, and Edmund seized upon it. "You seem concerned about the gardens." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I beg your pardon, my lord. It is not my place to express opinions about the estate." "On the contrary," Edmund said, rising from his chair to stand closer to her. "I value the observations of those who work most closely with the daily operations of Blackwood Hall. Tell me, what do you think of the gardens?" Rose's hands trembled slightly as she straightened the items on the tea-tray. "They are beautiful, my lord. Lily and I often admire them from the servants' quarters. The rose garden, in particular, is magnificent." "And you prefer roses to other flowers?" "I—" She hesitated, then seemed to gather courage. "I find them complex, my lord. Beautiful, certainly, but possessed of thorns that demand respect." Edmund moved closer still, close enough to see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. "An astute observation. Beauty often comes with complications." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. Rose's violet eyes widened, and Edmund saw in them a reflection of his own inner turmoil. Without conscious thought, he reached out to touch her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "My lord," she whispered, but she did not pull away. "You are very beautiful, Rose," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Surely you must be aware of the effect you have." Her breathing quickened. "I am only a servant, my lord. I have no business considering such things." "Perhaps not," Edmund agreed, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "But we cannot always choose what we feel, can we?" Before she could respond, Another knock echoed through the study. Rose stepped back quickly, her composure restored with admirable speed, as Lily entered carrying additional logs for the fire. "Mrs. Pemberton sent me to tend the fire, my lord," Lily explained, her gaze moving between her sister and Edmund with obvious curiosity. "Of course," Edmund replied smoothly, though his heart raced at this unexpected development. "The cold is rather penetrating tonight." As Lily knelt before the fireplace, coaxing the flames to greater heights, Edmund found himself studying her profile. Where Rose possessed a cool, classical beauty, Lily radiated warmth and vitality. Her movements as she tended the fire were fluid and confident, and when she glanced over her shoulder at him, her smile held an openness that was distinctly different from her sister's reserved manner. "Will there be anything else, my lord?" Rose asked, though her voice carried a slight tremor. "Actually, yes," Edmund heard himself say, though he had no clear plan. "Please, both of you, sit for a moment. The storm shows no signs of stopping, and I find myself in need of company this evening." The twins exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about the propriety of such a request. Edmund gestured toward the chairs positioned near the fire, and after a moment's hesitation, both women perched on the edge of their seats, back straight, hands folded in their laps. "Tell me about yourselves," Edmund said, settling back in his own chair. "How did you come to seek employment at Blackwood Hall?" Lily spoke first, her natural warmth overcoming her nervousness. "Our father was a tenant farmer, my lord, but he died 2 summers past. Our mother followed him before the harvest, and we found ourselves without family or means of support. Lord Ashford was kind enough to employ us," Rose continued. "But when his wife's health required them to remove to the continent, we needed new positions. And you chose to come here together. You must be very close." "We are," Lily said with obvious affection, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. "We've never been separated, not for a single day of our lives." Edmund found this declaration both touching and troubling. The bond between the sisters was evident, yet it complicated his growing feelings for both of them. How could he pursue one without causing pain to the other? And how could he ignore the attraction he felt for both? "You must find it difficult," he said carefully, "being so dependent upon each other. Do you never long for independence?" Rose's response was immediate. "We are stronger together than apart, my lord. What affects one of us affects both." "Indeed," Edmund murmured, though the implications of her words sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the November wind. The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics both mundane and personal. Edmund learned that Rose loved to read and had taught herself to sketch, while Lily possessed a beautiful singing voice and could play the pianoforte. Both were more educated than their station typically allowed, a testament to their late father's progressive views on the importance of learning. When the storm finally began to subside, Edmund reluctantly dismissed them, but not before experiencing a moment of pure longing as he watched them leave together, their blond heads bent in quiet conversation. The following weeks brought a subtle but significant change to the atmosphere at Blackwood Hall. Edmund found himself anticipating the twins' appearances with an eagerness that would have appalled his younger self. He began to take his meals at times when he knew they would be serving, requested their assistance with tasks that brought them into closer proximity, and discovered reasons to linger in rooms where they worked. Rose responded to his increased attention with careful courtesy tinged with something that might have been reciprocal interest. She would meet his gaze for a fraction longer than propriety dictated, and once, when he handed her a book from his personal library, their fingers brushed in a contact that sent electricity racing through his veins. Lily's response was more open, though equally complex. Her natural warmth seemed to intensify in his presence, and she began to offer small observations about the weather, the house, or her duties that invited further conversation. When she smiled at him, which happened with increasing frequency, Edmund felt as though the sun had emerged from behind clouds. The situation reached a turning point in early December, when the first heavy snow of winter blanketed the Yorkshire moors. Edmund had been reviewing the household accounts in the library when Rose entered to tend the fire. She wore a simple gray dress that emphasized her slender figure, and her hair was pinned back in a style that revealed the graceful line of her neck. "The snow is quite heavy, my lord," she observed as she arranged the logs. "Mrs. Pemberton fears we may be confined to the house for several days if it continues." "That would not be entirely unwelcome," Edmund replied, setting aside his ledger. "I find myself appreciating the solitude of Blackwood Hall more than usual of late." Rose glanced at him curiously. "You do not miss London society, my lord? The theatres and social gatherings?" "London holds little appeal for me any more," he said truthfully. "I find the company here far more interesting." A blush colored her cheeks, but she continued with her task. Edmund rose from his desk and moved to stand behind her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. "Rose," he said softly. She turned, and suddenly they were mere inches apart, her violet eyes wide with uncertainty and something else that made his pulse quicken. Without conscious decision, Edmund cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. When they finally separated, Rose's breathing was unsteady. "My lord, we cannot. I am not." "You are everything," Edmund said fiercely. "Your station means nothing to me." "But it means everything to the world beyond these walls," she whispered. "What future could there be for us?" Before Edmund could answer, the library door opened, and Lily entered carrying a tea service. She stopped short at the scene before her, the tray wavering in her hands as she took in their obvious intimacy. "Forgive me, my lord. I did not mean to interrupt." Edmund stepped back from Rose, his mind racing. "Lily, please, set the tea down and join us." She did as requested, though her movements were mechanical, her gaze darting between her sister and Edmund with poorly concealed distress. "I owe you both an explanation," Edmund began, though he had no clear idea what that explanation might be. "My feelings. The situation is more complex than it should be." "What situation?" Lily asked quietly. Edmund looked at Rose, then at Lily, seeing in both faces the same beauty that had captivated him, the same intelligence that challenged him, and the same vulnerability that moved him. "I find myself drawn to both of you," he admitted with brutal honesty. "I know it is wrong, impossible, yet I cannot deny what I feel." The twins exchanged a look that spoke of their deep connection, a communication that needed no words. Rose reached for her sister's hand, and Lily accepted the gesture without hesitation. "What are you saying, my lord?" Rose asked carefully. "I am saying that I care for you both, in ways that society would condemn and logic cannot justify. I am saying that the thought of losing either of you is unbearable." Lily's voice was barely audible. "And what would you have us do with this knowledge?" Edmund had no answer that did not sound either selfish or impossible. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of snow against the windows and the crackling of the fire. Finally, Rose spoke. "Lily and I must speak privately, my lord. We need time to consider." "Of course," Edmund agreed, though dismissing them was the last thing he wanted. "Take whatever time you need." After they left, Edmund stood alone in the library, staring into the fire and wondering what madness had possessed him to speak so openly. He had violated every principle of his upbringing, abandoned the careful control that had defined his adult life, and for what? The impossible dream of loving two women who deserved far better than the divided affections of a conflicted nobleman? The next morning brought no resolution, only the awkward dance of routine maintained despite the fundamental shift that had occurred between them. The twins performed their duties with their usual efficiency, but Edmund sensed a tension in their movements, a carefulness in their interactions with him that spoke of serious consideration taking place behind their professional facades. 3 days passed before Edmund received any indication of their decision. He was in his study when Hartwell announced that the Fairfax sisters requested a private audience. Edmund's heart hammered as he granted permission, uncertain what their carefully composed expressions might reveal. They entered together, as they did everything, presenting a united front that was both comforting and intimidating. Rose spoke first. "My lord, Lily and I have discussed your declaration. We have reached a decision, though we realize it may not be what you expect." Edmund braced himself for rejection, for the sensible words that would restore proper boundaries and relegate his feelings to the realm of impossible fantasies. Instead, Lily stepped forward. "We have decided that if you truly care for both of us, and if we both return those feelings, then perhaps there is a way to navigate this unusual situation." Edmund stared at them, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You mean?" "We mean that love does not always conform to society's expectations," Rose said quietly. "Lily and I have shared everything our entire lives. If we are both to love and be loved by the same man, then we will face that challenge as we have faced all others, together." The implications of their words washed over Edmund like a tide. They were offering him something unprecedented, something that defied every convention of their time and class. Yet as he looked at their faces, he saw not scandal or impropriety, but the same courage and determination that had first drawn him to them. "Are you certain?" he asked. "The risks are considerable," Lily acknowledged. "But so is the alternative. We have seen how you look at both of us, my lord, and we have examined our own hearts with equal honesty. Rose loves you, and I love you, and we love each other too deeply to let jealousy destroy what we have built together." Edmund moved toward them, his heart full of emotions he could barely name. "And I love you both," he said, "more than I thought it possible to love anyone." What followed was a period of careful exploration, of learning how to love and be loved in a situation none of them had ever imagined. Edmund discovered that Rose's reserved nature masked depths of passion that took his breath away, while Lily's warmth extended to every aspect of intimacy with a generosity that humbled him. More surprisingly, he found that his love for one sister enhanced rather than diminished his feelings for the other. When he held Rose in his arms, he did not forget Lily. Instead, he felt grateful for the bond that allowed him to love them both without causing the pain that jealousy might bring. When Lily laughed at something he said, sharing her joy with her sister, Edmund experienced a completeness he had never known was possible. The arrangement required absolute secrecy, of course. To the rest of the household, the twins remained simply efficient maids who happened to work closely with their employer. Only Mrs. Pemberton seemed to sense that something had changed, and she proved her worth by maintaining discretion while subtly adjusting schedules and duties to provide the privacy such a delicate situation required. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, as Edmund, Rose, and Lily learned to navigate their unconventional love. There were challenges, certainly. Moments when the strain of secrecy weighed heavily upon them all, times when the impossibility of their situation seemed overwhelming. Yet they persevered, bound together by emotions too powerful to deny. Edmund began to make discreet inquiries about properties in remote locations where they might live more openly. He investigated the possibility of travel to countries where British social conventions held less sway. The twins, meanwhile, continued their education under his guidance, reading voraciously from his library and developing skills that would serve them well regardless of what the future might bring. It was in late summer that the crisis Edmund had always feared finally arrived. Lord Pembroke, a neighboring landowner and longtime family friend, arrived unexpectedly for an extended visit, bringing with him gossip from London and expectations of the entertainment appropriate to his station. "My dear Edmund," Pembroke declared over dinner their first evening, "you have become positively hermit-like in your habits. When did you last attend a proper social gathering? The mothers of eligible daughters are beginning to despair of you entirely." Edmund deflected the conversation with practiced skill, but Pembroke's presence brought an unwelcome reminder of the world beyond Blackwood Hall, a world that would never accept or understand what he had found with Rose and Lily. The situation deteriorated when Pembroke, while exploring the house during Edmund's absence on estate business, encountered the twins in the morning-room. Later, over brandy, he made comments that caused Edmund's blood to run cold. "Remarkable specimens, those blonde maids of yours," Pembroke observed with the casual tone of a man discussing livestock. "Twins, are they not? Quite striking. You must take care they don't attract unwanted attention from the local men." "They are excellent servants," Edmund replied carefully. "I value their discretion and efficiency." "Oh, I'm sure you do," Pembroke said with a knowing smile that made Edmund's hands clench around his brandy snifter. "Still, it might be wise to consider replacing them with less distracting staff. A man in your position cannot be too careful about appearances." That night, Edmund lay awake considering Pembroke's words and their implications. His friend's visit would end in a few days, but others would follow. The isolation that had protected their secret could not last forever. The next morning, he called Rose and Lily to his study, ostensibly to receive routine instructions, but actually to share his growing concerns. "Lord Pembroke suspects something," he told them without preamble. "His comments last night made that clear." Rose paled, but her voice remained steady. "What do you think he will do?" "Nothing immediate, perhaps, but he will talk. In London, at his clubs, in the drawing-rooms of mutual acquaintances. The story will grow in the telling, and eventually it will reach ears that matter to my reputation and position." Lily moved to stand beside her sister, their hands finding each other automatically. "What does that mean for us?" Edmund had spent the sleepless hours considering exactly that question. "It means we have a choice to make. We can end this now, restore proper boundaries, and hope that any gossip dies from lack of substance. Or, Rose prompted, or we can leave England entirely. I have been investigating properties in Italy, in Switzerland, places where we might live quietly without the scrutiny of British society." The twins exchanged one of their wordless communications, and Edmund waited with barely controlled anxiety for their response. "You would give up everything for us?" Lily asked finally. "Your title, your estates, your position in society. What good are any of those things without happiness? Without love?" Edmund replied. "I have spent years living according to others' expectations, conforming to standards that brought me no joy. I will not sacrifice what we have built together for the approval of people who see me only as a title and an income." Rose stepped forward, her violet eyes bright with unshed tears. "And if we choose differently? If we decide the risk is too great?" The question he had dreaded, yet Edmund knew his answer without hesitation. "Then I will respect your decision, provide you with excellent references, and spend the rest of my life regretting what might have been." The discussion that followed was the most difficult of Edmund's life. They examined every aspect of their situation, considered alternatives, weighed risks against rewards. Through it all, the bond between the three of them remained strong, their love evident in every word, every gesture, every shared glance. Finally, as the sun set over the Yorkshire moors, Rose spoke the words that would determine their future. "We choose love," she said simply. "Whatever the cost, whatever the challenges, we choose each other." Lily nodded her agreement, and Edmund felt a weight he had carried for months finally lift from his shoulders. "Then we leave England as soon as arrangements can be made. I will tell Pembroke I am considering an extended tour of the continent. My solicitors can manage the estate in my absence." The next few weeks passed in a blur of careful preparation. Edmund made discreet inquiries about transportation, secured letters of credit from his London banks, and purchased traveling documents under names that would provide them with the anonymity they craved. The twins, meanwhile, prepared for the greatest adventure of their lives with the same quiet efficiency they brought to all their endeavors. They studied guidebooks of foreign countries, practiced basic phrases in Italian and French, and helped Edmund select which possessions to take and which to leave behind. Lord Pembroke's departure provided the perfect cover for their own. Edmund made a great show of considering his friend's advice about travel, even requesting recommendations for hotels and guides in various European capitals. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the twins' arrival at Blackwood Hall, a private carriage departed for Liverpool, where passage had been booked on a steamer bound for the Continent. To any observer, Lord Blackwood was simply beginning the grand tour that unmarried gentlemen of his class often undertook. What they could not see were the two cloaked figures who shared his compartment, or the love that bound all three travellers together despite the uncertainty of their destination. As the Yorkshire countryside disappeared behind them, Edmund reached for the hands of the two women who had transformed his life so completely. Rose squeezed his fingers with her characteristic quiet strength, while Lily's warm smile promised adventures yet to come. "Are you certain?" he asked them one final time, though they were now past the point of return. "We are certain," they replied in unison, and in their voices Edmund heard the echo of the vows they had spoken to each other in the privacy of his chambers, promises of love and loyalty that no church would sanction but which bound them more surely than any legal contract. The ship that carried them toward their new life cut through autumn seas beneath stars that cared nothing for the conventions of nations or the expectations of society. In the small cabin they shared, three people who had found the impossible discovered that love, when true enough, could indeed conquer all the obstacles the world might place in its path. Years later, in a villa overlooking the Italian coast, Edmund would sit in his garden watching Rose tend her beloved flowers, while Lily's laughter echoed from the music-room where she practiced at the pianoforte. Children with golden hair and violet eyes would play among the olive trees, calling him Papa with voices that carried the musical cadences of their mothers. By then, the scandal of his disappearance from English society would have faded into merely another tale whispered in London drawing-rooms. But the love that had driven them to such extremes would remain as strong as ever, a testament to the power of the heart to triumph over the rigid expectations of an unforgiving world. In the end, Edmund reflected, he had gained far more than he had lost. He had traded the hollow respect of society for the genuine love of two remarkable women. He had exchanged a life of proper loneliness for the warm chaos of an unconventional family. And he had learned that sometimes the greatest act of nobility was not conforming to one's station, but having the courage to follow one's heart wherever it might lead. The Baron of Ashworth was no more, but the man who had taken his place was infinitely richer for the transformation.